Hi, my name is Anna Tanzilla. I was a captain in the United States Air Force, and this is my story. So my story begins a little bit before I joined the military. I had a childhood trauma that led to PTSD, but back in the 1980s, in the 70s, they really didn't understand PTSD, and so nobody really understood what I was going through, why I had reoccurring nightmares, why I sometimes would just cringe when I would see certain people. And I don't think I even understood it for years. When I went to college, I joined ROTC with a plan to become a doctor, and I took a shift and decided to go into psychology. Now in the 1980s, they would tell you that childhood trauma did not affect an adult, which I'm here to tell you that's not true. When I told my dad I was going to join the military, he was kind of funny. He said, why are you going to do that? You're too stubborn to take orders. So I did it anyway. And really enjoyed my time. But some of that past trauma kind of pictured and kind of skewed some of the things that happened when I was in the military. And, back in the 80s, females in the military were not as common as they are now. And, there are some things that were considered harassment now that we just put up with. Somebody putting their arm around us or saying inappropriate things, we just put up with because we wanted to be where we were. And I don't regret that at all. But some of my past experiences from my childhood did affect how I would react sometimes to some of those things. For instance, a lieutenant colonel put his arm around me. Went in for a reach, and I told him that if he didn't remove his arm, I was going to break it. He removed his arm, and we were cordial after that. It worked. But I was able to do so many wonderful things while I was in the military and help so many people. I think one of the things that has affected me, and not only what I did in the military, but even what I do today, and I'll talk a little bit about that in a moment, was I was a personnel officer. And one of the very first things I did, I think I was on active duty for 2 days. I had to do a casualty notification for a gentleman that had been shot, and having to go and tell his family, his children specifically, what had happened to him. And I can remember their tears. I can remember the little one just trying to understand what was going on and why Daddy wasn't coming home anymore. And it wasn't during wartime. I served during the Cold War. It was through an accident that he was shot. And I can remember seeing those kids' eyes, and I could understand what it was they were going to go through. I could understand that trauma that they had just experienced and that would continue to experience. And 2 months in, I had to do another casualty notification, this time for a gentleman that was shot at home. The children were playing with a high-powered rifle that went off and shot him through the ceiling. That one was a little tougher because the children were definitely involved with what happened. And to see how these kids, how we could help them through what they were getting ready to go through. That was tough. That was tough to see. That was tough to try to help them find the resources. And there just wasn't a lot back then. There were no places to help these kids get through the trauma that they were getting ready to experience and that they had already gone through. There was just nothing. A few years later, a co-worker, his twin, completed suicide. That one was hard. That one was very hard because to go to the funeral and see somebody that looked just like my friend in the casket, it affected me. The nightmares came back even stronger. The paranoia, the hypervigilance came back even stronger, especially after that one. And then Yeah, again, but there was nothing to help my friend. There was nothing there that, other than us being kind and telling him things were going to be okay, there were no resources. And that hurt. That I didn't understand why there wasn't something, why we couldn't help him. What else could there be? When I got out of the service, and I got to do a lot of cool things when I was in the service. I got to be a guide for some generals. I got to see some interesting convoys that I still can't quite talk about. And being able to be around these men and women that they volunteered. They said yes. They did something most people don't do, and they were in the service, granted during a Cold War, but it was always tense. We were in Strategic Air Command at the time, which doesn't exist anymore, but at that point in time, it was like the tip of the readiness. And it was always tense. It was always had to be perfect. Everything had to be perfect. Again, adding to stress, adding to tension for all of these men and women that were there. I saw my fair share of individuals who attempted suicide. I saw my fair share of individuals who lost their control. At one point in time, I had a colonel call me and was very mad about something that wasn't my fault and proceeded to just cuss me out. And I proceeded to tell him, when you could talk to me in a civil tone, you can call me back. And he did, and I didn't get fired or court-martialed, so I was very happy about that. But all of these little experiences, they just compounded and they built. And then we started looking at, there was a group of us, we started looking at how could we give back? How could we make a difference? How could we change things? We did volunteer work for the veterans that were in need. We did volunteer work for elderly. We did anything we could do to just be of service even more than we already were. I remember one time a young airman, their house burnt down. No fault of their own. It was bad wiring on the Air Force's fault. But his house burnt down. He had a little child. He had nothing. And it was about Christmas time. And several of us just started going through our house. And all of that old child, the baby seats and all of that. We just gathered it up and put it in a big truck and just took it over to him. It was just, that's what we were doing. We wanted to help him. Part of it was because he needed it, and part of it was, I think, for us, we needed to feel of service. We needed to be able to do something that made a difference. And that was pretty powerful. Even now, that is, I think, what drives me. What can I do to make a difference in one individual's life and 3 individuals' lives? And I think I've always looked for those type of opportunities. The military definitely instilled that and made it even stronger for what we were doing. But I think it just keeps going. The way we want to give back, how we want to not necessarily be seen by the world, because it's not really about that. It's how do we want to be seen in our own minds. And have we done enough? A few years ago, I work at an organization called Camaraderie Foundation right now, and I did a lot of other jobs. I worked in corporate America for a while. Didn't quite fit my personality. I worked with adults that have intellectual and developmental disabilities, which was wonderful, challenging, amazing, but just it didn't quite fit the need. I really wanted to be back and work with veterans and make a difference again, make a difference in the lives of people who said yes. And so I found Camaraderie Foundation here in Orlando, Florida, and I joined it as their programs manager. Just being able to do programs and helping individuals connect, because when you leave the military, a lot of times you feel like you've fallen off of a cliff. And whether or not you enjoyed your time, whether or not you had friends there, you had a family, you had a community, and then you left, and you don't have that anymore. And the family and friends that you knew when you were growing up don't recognize the person you are anymore, because you've had different experiences. You've seen different things. So that's kind of what we're trying to do at Camaraderie Foundation. We're trying to help that readjustment. And I can say from my point, my readjustment was quite interesting, and which I can relate to a lot of the young people getting out now. I was told that because I was in the military, I had no practical business experience, by somebody who hadn't managed a budget of over $100,000, and at that time I'd already managed a budget of $2 million. I was told that I didn't really know how to supervise people when she had 5 and I had 200 at one point in time. So it was kind of interesting to hear those types of stories from people in the civilian community, kind of trying to peg what it was this military person could offer. With Camaraderie Foundation, we're trying to help with that readjustment. We're trying to help individuals understand how to really not sell themselves, but present themselves and what their brand is. After you've left the military, you're not in the military anymore. So who are you and what is your brand and how do you move forward from that? But more importantly, it's really helping those individuals who are in need of counseling. That's one of the things I think the Camaraderie Foundation, the VA, other organizations that I can name have really kind of stepped up to try to help with. And we get to see those stories of that individual that is mimicking PTSD behaviors as a 4-year-old get some help, because children do need help. It's not all about what the service member experienced. It's about what the whole family experienced. And I can say that 100%, from what happened in my childhood, that childhood trauma stays with you for a really long time, forever, kind of. It's in your mind. It's there always. And how you deal with it or how you can deal with it as a child is going to affect how you deal with things as an adult. How you're dealing with college, how you're dealing with stress, how you're dealing with marriage. All of those stressors that you have, if you can figure out a way to deal with that childhood trauma, it's going to really impact how they grow up. And that's really, when I joined the Camaraderie Foundation, I wanted to make a difference again. I wanted to be able to help. I had an unwritten goal to be able to help 1,000 people. Well, we've more than exceeded that. I have some other unwritten goals right now to be able to expand it even bigger than we are now, because there's still so many people that are hurting, and the children, the spouses, the caregivers, their parents, the veterans themselves. The veterans coming out now have experienced so much, and we call it, I always call it the yo-yo effect of their deployments. These folks haven't gone on just one deployment, like you did in Vietnam. They went to Vietnam, they came back, and it was awful. Nothing that ever should happen to anybody. But most of them just went once. The people who are getting out now have been on deployments in combat zones. Sometimes, at one point in time, I know of one person that went 18 times. Can you imagine? 18 times? You go over, you have to be hypervigilant, you have to be very mindful of your surroundings, and then you come back home. And you do that over and over again. And so how do you turn it off when you get home? You just can't without some help. I always say asking for help is hard, and you have to be strong enough to ask for help. To be honest, you have to be strong enough to share a story. And I will say I didn't even talk about my PTSD until last year. My PTSD happened, my experiences happened when I was a child, grade school. And I didn't talk about it to anybody. I got help, but I never really talked about it. I never shared it. Never wanted that part of myself to be what was told, what people knew. Well, that's the same way veterans are. They don't want that to be who they're known for. They want to be strong. That's why they join. They're strong. So I say you have to be strong enough to ask. You have to be strong enough to ask for help and strong enough to accept it and then share, because there's somebody else out there that's gone through what you've gone through. And they need to hear your story so that they're willing to share and ask for help. And that's really why I'm here and what Camaraderie Foundation is all about. And I thank you for listening to my story. And again, I'm Anna Tanzilla, Captain, U.S. Air Force. And thank you.